Hello and welcome to Mothman's Bookshop. My name is Nicole, and today I'd like to tell you about The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Warning, I'll try and make this as spoiler-free as possible, but given it's a book review, there are bound to be a couple spoilers. If Good Omens was never written, I think this would be my favorite book, probably of all time. It falls into my magical realism with a touch of existential crisis criteria. The journey through learning to live and coming to the conclusion that you can't really learn to live, you have to just live, is so well written. The book introduces a lot of unique concepts regarding things like reincarnation, the afterlife, second chances, and a whole lot of other things like that. Trigger warning, since the catalyst for this book is a suicide attempt and I will be talking about some mental health related things. I've included resources in the description for anyone who may need them. The book follows a young woman named Nora Seed, who ends up in the Midnight Library when she attempts suicide one night after a series of unfortunate events. Most recently, her cat died, she was fired from her job at the local music cafe, and her piano student ended his lessons. Less recently, her mother died of cancer, she backed out of things like becoming a rock star with her band and moving to Australia with her best friend, and she didn't go for her master's degree. All this piles on and eventually boils over. This brings us to the namesake of the book, The Midnight Library, a sort of in-between world between life and death. There, Nora meets the librarian, who guides her through the library and its inner workings to help find the life she truly wants. Now let me take a moment to explain the mechanics of the library itself, because it's very cool and a bit confusing if you haven't read the book. While it isn't super clear what you have to do to end up in the library, the dimension is customized to whoever is in it. For Nora, it's a library where all the books are green, a choice I'll get to in a second. There are an infinite amount of books, all of which correlate to a choice Nora could have made earlier in her life, and those choices could be as small as drinking tea or coffee one morning, or something like choosing a college to go to. Each book Nora opens brings her to a new life from that midnight she attempted suicide and forward as if she's lived in it her whole life. If she likes that one, then she stays, and the Midnight Library eventually fades from her mind, and if it disappoints her enough that she doesn't want to continue living in it, then she returns to the library to find a new one. Now let's get into the review, and start with the basics at that. I love the idea of you aren't dead or alive, so you're here in this between life and death sort of world, because it's super unique compared to the whole heaven and hell dichotomy, which is seen in most afterlife-based books. You die, you either have to do something to go up, or you have to do something to go down, heaven, hell, the basics. But here, instead of, oh, you have to do something to get to the afterlife, it's you have to do something to stay alive. Usually it's like, oh, someone dies and now you have to solve a mission to get them back, or you need to go to the underworld to get something to save the world, or something like that. But here, it's pretty refreshing to see that instead of having to find a way to stay dead or to come back to life for saving the world reasons, you have to get back to life for yourself and to continue, just living. I also think the book provides a new angle on mental health that I haven't seen before, where you don't necessarily need family and friends to pull you out of a situation, but instead some situations rely only on you and your personal behaviors to save you and to maintain how healthy you are. It's definitely a good book for people who feel lost in life or need just some sort of motivation to keep going. The Midnight Library is also just a very interesting setting in general, because there's really a lot you can do with an infinite library with infinite books, each of which holds a new version of who you are as a person. Now, let's talk about the green symbolism, because I mentioned this in my explanation of what the library is, but each book in it is green, and I didn't realize this when I first read it because I wasn't really paying attention to things like that, but now that I'm reviewing books and I kind of need to pay more attention to things, the green symbolism makes so much sense, or the green books make so much sense, because in literature, green usually refers to the ideas of life, resurrection, guilt, renewal, and things like that. So you see her feeling a lot of regret, a lot of guilt about things she's done in her root life, and Nora needs these books in order to gain a new one and be resurrected, which is so cool when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, to see that the books are green for a reason, not just because it's her favorite color or something. I love seeing Nora learn and discover more about herself after each life she tries, and come to different conclusions regarding whether or not she actually regrets her original decision. I saw a bit of myself in Nora at times, especially in parts where she realizes that her dreams aren't actually her own, such as becoming an Olympic swimmer. In her root or original life, Nora was a swimmer and on track to become an Olympic one until I think around the end of middle school, and then she quit. Her dad was her coach, and her quitting really impacted his physical and mental health, because his dream for her was to be this active and healthy person, unlike him. In one of the book lives, Nora never quit and her dad stays healthy or becomes healthier, and she's this world-famous inspirational speaker and swimmer. And along the way, she realizes that this dream was always her father, sort of living vicariously through her. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to on some level, because a lot of parents place their expectations on you, or if they regret not doing something or starting something in their own youth, they might make it your responsibility instead. Seeing Nora realize that her dreams were not her own, but her dad's or parents', was cathartic for me personally. Sometimes parents might regret their career paths, so they right their wrongs by pushing you into the path they wish they'd taken. It's things like this throughout the book that I relate to: strained family relationships, social isolation, and not taking advantage of seemingly great opportunities, and I think that's what adds to my love of this book, that I get to see some of myself in this fictional character. On a lighter note, at some point, Nora finds another slider, or person who's going through this midnight library, or midnight whatever, and trying out new lives to see what fits them best. And it raises questions about how the midnight dimension appears, whether it's self-harm related, or whether you have to experience some kind of near-death experience, or if it's just natural causes and you want to see what happens if you took other choices before you die. And that idea of a customizable dimension opens up a whole new treasure trove of possibilities. Now, in one of the lives, Nora goes for that master's degree in philosophy and becomes a professor, and besides her being in that life the longest, it was also her happiest life in that point in the book. While Haig doesn't spend much time focusing on her regret over not getting the degree originally, the way he includes it in the story and expands on its effects is much better done than the whole degree subplot in The Lost Apothecary. I saw this in an NPR review, and it's a point that I agree with, and it's that while the entire concept of infinite choices and infinite possibilities is great, the entire book going in a straight line with no big or any twist at all feels very dumbed down. It feels a bit like some lost opportunity with a concept as adventurous as this one. The story feels a bit too simple and linear to be about something as complex as mental illness. Matt Haig was mainly a children's book writer until about the mid-2000s, and since then he's written more books geared towards ages 13 and up, I believe. But more recently, he's released a few mental health / more philosophical books, such as Reasons to Stay Alive and How to Stop Time. The Midnight Library seems unique from anything else he's written, so I definitely think he was a little bit too careful when writing this, and some parts do feel like they're written for younger audiences, but it's still a masterpiece of a book. The ending was beautiful, if a little cliche. I like the addition of some action at the end, though there were some great tense scenes throughout the book already, and overall the ending made a lot of sense. It really fit the person that Nora became by the end of the book, and I cried a bit by the end if I'm being honest. Final thoughts? When I originally read this, I got through it in like a day and a half. I think even if you don't get as much into this book as I did, it's still a very quick read because everything moves along at a good pace and the book itself is fairly short. Most platforms give this book a 4.5 out of 5, and I give it a 4.7 out of 5, once again proving that there is nothing mathematical about these scores at all, and they are based purely on my opinion and my level of spite on whatever given day I'm writing the script on. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Mothman's Bookshop. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. If you did and would like to know when the next episode comes out, do yourself a favor and follow the podcast, and if you have any questions or recommendations, feel free to use the form in the description or join the Discord. Once again, my name's Nicole, and I'll see you next week here in Mothman's Bookshop.